topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and I have been a diversity educator for a number of years. I've always been very interested in hearing diverse points of view and learning about why are people segregated, isolated, separated. I spent a lot of years studying all the forms of oppression that separate and divide people and hurt people. And I have developed programs for coaching individuals or groups, training. Some of them are training programs, some of them are coaching programs. If you're interested in seeing any of my programs and calling to talk about setting one up for you, you can find that information on my website, knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. And today we have my guest is Susan Corbett, who is just an amazing advocate and around digital equity issues. I met her years ago, and she's now the executive director of the National Digital Equity Center, and she identified the lack of access and lack of resources for so many people, particularly in rural areas in rural Maine. And it's just been fascinating watching how her thinking of inclusion has just expanded and grown, and how she was kind of ringing the alarms years ago. So I want to ask her about her story and also to educate us about what she is seeing now from Maine and her now in her national perspective about digital equity and closing the digital divide. Susan Corbett, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Be here. It's my pleasure to be here. You and I go back a long way, so I'm happy to reconnect with you in your role in California.
Thank you. Yes, I remember when you were working in a medical health center when I was doing an education campaign about preventing intimate partner violence. And you were at that time, like doctors and providers were still using paper, right?
Right.
And you converted it, you started converting it, right, over to digital. And can you just sort of give us an idea from there how that?
Sure. My background is in healthcare, and I was in healthcare for over 25 years. And so it was during the time when computers first started coming on the scene into physician offices and into businesses. And for physician offices, they had to go from a paper system to a digital system, and they had to learn software, and they had to learn network, and they had to learn how to process claims by pushing a button, and they had to do it right, or else they were their cash flow was going to be affected. So I got into the computer industry, technology training, digital literacy, which wasn't even a word back then, but really in the very early years, and have progressed pretty steadily ever since then.
And I remember when we belonged to a network, or a couple of them together in rural Maine. And I believe, did you start one of them called Mighty Women?
I did start the Mighty Women.
Yeah, and you identified many women leaders, of which you were preeminent.
Yeah, eventually I came into an internet service provider, I became a partner as an internet service provider in Down East Maine, which is one of the most rural parts of the United States. We're in the most northeast corner of the U.S., it's where the sun rises every morning first. And at the time, this is back in 2005, there were only 2 towns that had broadband. And I've been looking at the wireless world, and I had moved to Jonesport, Maine in 1998, and most of my physicians were from the greater Boston area. And eventually they said, well, we want to send this to you electronically, which meant I needed an internet connection. And I called the phone company and said, I need an internet connection. And they laughed at me because there was no such thing. There were only 2 towns in the entire 2,500 square mile region.
Excuse me, what year was that? Can you say it again?
That was 2005.
Okay.
So I ended up with a very expensive connection through the telephone company. And around that time, I met the technicians that put the broadband in those 2 towns. And I pitched the idea of a wireless network and joined the company and eventually became the CEO of that company and the sole partner. We put a wireless network in Jonesport, and it was a lot of a lot of mistakes, and you had to start all over again, and we had to figure it out. And wireless at the time had been tested in places like Texas where the ground was flat, and in Maine we had things like trees and hills and oceans. And so eventually we just kept working it through. And then the rest of the county found what we were doing. And the next thing you know, we built 2,500 miles of network, wireless network over the county. And in doing that and trying to figure out the financing for that and how do you make this happen? How do you take something from, ground zero? And so I started meeting a lot of people. And what I found was that many of the leaders in the county were women, and many of the organizations didn't know what the other organizations would do. And every time I met someone, they would say to me, hey, you know who you need to meet? And they'd give me the names of 2 to 3 more women. And eventually we put this group together called the Mighty Women of Washington County. And we spent a couple of years getting to know each other and what our organizations did and what we could do to support each other. The collaboration in a very rural area was so important for all of us to move the good work that everybody was doing forward with a lot of support.
And it certainly helped anyone we were serving, any families, regardless of what the service was, because we were networking and collaborating. And
Exactly.
Wow. So I remember when at some point you said you were the first person I heard say there's only one cable coming into Washington County. And can you say more about that?
Yeah. So what you're talking about is something called backhaul. So, we had, one fiber line coming into the whole county, and that you were going to be limited of how much speed people could have at their homes. Eventually, under the Obama administration, there was a program under the American Recovery Act that funded middle mile projects, which is the fiber that goes, if you think of a highway, that fiber goes down a highway, and it and then you have off ramps off of that highway. Well, we needed more fiber across the state, and so private company applied for funding and received the funding to build this middle mile network across the state of Maine. It was 1,100 miles of fiber. Other states were doing the same thing. And then from there, the local internet service providers could build off of that fiber. And so all of a sudden, we started to have more robust broadband, and networks started to increase. And you need to remember, during this whole time period, people were doing more with technology. If you just even look at yourself and what you were doing with technology 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it's a total it's a total upswing in the use of technology. Today, when we talk, we're seeing more fiber networks built across the country. And in particular, a lot of rural areas where there's, limited providers, mostly because, those providers have to meet their return on investment. And so having some subsidy from federal and state government is helpful in building out those networks. But 10 years ago, when we were talking about upload and download speeds, the general sort of rule of thumb is a business needs good upload speeds, but a consumer, the resident, does not. And that's no longer true, because every time you take your iPhone out and you take a picture, it's uploading to the cloud. And then you multiply that by the millions of pictures that are being taken every minute across the globe. So upload speed now is as important as download speed. And we saw during the pandemic, the homes that were really affected by that, because they didn't have enough of a broadband connection to support everybody in the household that needed to be on remote either school or work, and needed that video conference connection, which means that you need to have a better broadband speed up and down.
So you had talked to the state government in Augusta, the capital of Maine. You had approached them years before the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Tell us the difference between how you were received the years before the pandemic and then after the pandemic started.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I'm a board member of the Connect Maine Authority, which is our quasi-government agency that does broadband. So we give out grants every year, and there'll be an influx of money coming in from the federal government, which will flow through the state and through that agency. It's in 2005, I started going before legislators and talking about the importance of broadband and talking about this digital divide. And, and that, we needed the state of Maine had never had a line item in their budget for broadband. The Connect Maine Authority was funded from a surtax on landline telephones. And when it started out about, $1.7 or $8 million. Well, how many of us now have landline telephones, right? And so those funds get less and less and less, which meant there was not a whole lot of money, $1 million a year, which doesn't go very far when you're building fiber networks. So with the so the state of Maine had never appropriated any funds specifically for broadband, and it was through that surtax. And so every year I would go in front of the legislators and talk about the importance of broadband, the importance of digital equity, the importance of funding these networks, and trying to help them understand that private industry could only do so much. When you're looking at homes that are really far apart from each other, it makes a hard business case to build out a network. And so, over the years, everybody listened and they were very polite and all of that. But then, the pandemic hit, and, there was that moment that, that I said, is anybody listening now? And do you understand what I have been talking about? And so many of us who are advocates of broadband, digital equity, and digital inclusion for all these years, do you now see what the issue is? And it became very real. So the first issue was that we needed remote school. And we had students across the state that had no broadband connection, had no equipment at home, or they had one computer that was being shared by everybody in the family. Mm-hmm. And now we have parents who needed to be on remote work, and we had students who needed to attend remote school. And so we, at the National Digital Equity Center, we worked with Department of Education and some partners, and they were giving out hotspots to students across the state. It was an expensive project, but they didn't have any choice. And the first thing they had to do was figure out who didn't have a broadband connection. or who didn't have enough of a broadband connection, and then also get devices into the hands of students. So having one device in the household to share amongst 3, 4, 5 people was not going to work. So every student needed their own device. The second group were the remote workers who suddenly were remote workers. And did they have a broadband connection, or did they have enough of a broadband connection to support everybody in the family? And did they have equipment? And for the employers, all of a sudden, they were not prepared to pay for equipment for everyone, internet connections. I mean, this was we were in total chaos. So that was another group that we worried about. And then the third group, this is the one I lost the most sleep over. We have a lot of older adults. Maine is an older state, and we were already worried about isolation and loneliness. And then there's a pandemic, and we have to shelter in place. And so we had a lot of older residents across the state that were totally isolated. And this was the group that tended to be a little bit further behind in the use of technology. So those were three, huge issues that, not only Maine, but every state was facing when the pandemic happened.
And I'm so curious, and who did the footwork of finding the people who did not have connection?
Well, for the Department of Education, they reached out to all the superintendents. The superintendents did a great job in contacting their families, the families of their students, to find out exactly what was needed. And so Department of Ed and all the superintendents in the schools across the state did a really good job in getting technology connection, broadband connections into the hands of those students so that they could participate in those classes. At the National Digital Equity Center, we have a curricula for home and education. We did a lot of training with teachers. In teaching, they were using all the Google platforms, so Google Meet, Google Classroom. And we also had a lot of parents of students that were also wanted to learn that whole Google platform too, so they could help their kiddos attend class every day. So, at the National Digital Equity Center, we do a lot. We're very fluid. So what's the need? And let's make sure that we can be right at the forefront of helping people navigate technology.
So yes, I have a long list of some of the classes that the National Digital Equity Center offers.
We have about 40 classes that we offer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How many teachers do you have?
We have a staff of 20, and it's mostly all instructors.
Right, instructors.
Yeah.
Yeah, from everything from, like you said, the Google Suite to just basic internet and computer safety, social media, Microsoft, QuickBooks, protecting your digital presence, using technology for better health, getting what you need online. And I'm sure those are just a few. And I know that your URL is, the web address is running thanks to our engineer. And if people want to already start writing down that. So the isolation that was already so real, of course, was so exacerbated for so many people in Maine. Were there other groups that you paid special attention to, well, it's called special attention, but tried to give equitable, equal attention to, that are normally marginalized?
So we spent a lot of time with our older adult population. We were very lucky in that one of our foundations gave us a little bit of money, and we purchased 100 tablets with cellular connectivities, which was not nearly enough of what was needed across the state, but we had to start somewhere. And so we said, okay, if you're 70 and older and you don't have an internet connection, you don't have any equipment, we will give you this tablet for 90 days, and we will assign you a digital literacy instructor as a tutor to teach you how to use it. The program was wildly successful. The tablets were mailed because again, we're in the middle of COVID, so the tablets were mailed to the end user. They were assigned a tutor. Typically the first tutoring session was over the phone, and on that phone call, they're teaching that person how to turn on the device, because if they've never had a device, what's run your finger up the side, you find a little knob, and so they would get the device turned on. The tablet had the Zoom room for the instructor, and so what the instructor on the first session tried to do is to get the student to click on that link. And you can just imagine when they did, and all of a sudden they were face to face with their instructor for the very first time. And it is just pure joy to watch that, right? I mean, someone who's never done this before, it just seems like something from outer space somewhere, right? And the tutor would spend as much time as was needed to get that student comfortable using the technology. The end game was to get them to join any of the classes. So we have a whole curricula on aging well with technology. And so we would, we wanted them to join the classes. And one of the motivations of joining the classes was that they were going to be with other older students. And so it was, were we helping to combat that isolation and loneliness by opening up their world to the video platform? We spent a lot of time working with families that were not here and wanted to connect to mom and dad. And so we worked with families to get them connected and online on video conferencing. So it was just really, it was so rewarding. What happened is that it spurred a lot of relationships, partnerships, and collaborations across the state. So we have dozens and dozens and dozens of partners. Many of them raised funds for devices for their patients or clients or constituents, and then partnered with NDEC to provision the devices, get them get them shipped out, and then provide that one-on-one tutoring. So the National Digital Equity Center has raised over $4 million to provide free digital literacy classes to all Maine residents. And people can take as many classes as they wish. And if they aren't ready to get into a class and they need some assistance, we will give them that one-on-one instruction.
And are some of your partners tribal communities?
We do have some tribal communities. We have we work with Maine Indian Education. We have, and again, lots of either devices or instruction. We're a resource for anyone who needs us across the state. The majority of our students, we have a lot of students that are unemployed. We have 57% of our students are over 55, 8% are over 80. So, and what that tells us is that if you want to learn, you can. We got additional funding from the state of Maine, the Maine Office of Community Development for equipment. And then we were able to open it up to anyone, any age, who met the income eligibility guidelines. For the laptops and desktops, if they take 5 hours of instruction, we'll give them a certificate of ownership. So we're making sure that they're taking classes, a lot of internet safety classes, and to be sure that, especially for those going up online for the first time, not everything is okay online, right? And we want them to be sure that they're being safe, they're protecting their online presence, they're recognizing fraud and abuse, and so we're trying to support them as much as we can.
That's fantastic. And I know you were also a pioneer in tying together the economic development aspect.
Yeah. Well, when I was CEO of Axiom, that was a driver of helping those economic development organizations understand what can happen with a good broadband connection. And we even see it today, today, the pandemic really showed it. Rural Maine, right? All of a sudden we had this influx of people who were going to come live in Maine because if they had a good broadband connection, they could work from anywhere. And so that's a great economic driver. So it became very real to some of these very rural areas that are lacking in broadband, either no broadband or not enough broadband. It's become very important for them if they want to bring in people from outside of Maine and come live in this beautiful state, which is a great economic driver. Then we have to have the infrastructure in place to support them.
That's right. I'm just looking at your bio because you have done so much. And so where do you usually do public speaking? Are you go ahead.
So I've been public speaking for a very, very long time. Prior to the pandemic, I traveled all over the state. I traveled all over the country. Since the pandemic, we've all learned a new way of having meetings and doing presentations. And, I think that people have done a really good job in figuring out how to navigate all of that. Eventually, we'll get back into physical space, but I think there's a lot of times that, we had meetings, I live 3.5 hours from the state capitol. And so a 3.5 hour drive for the 1 hour meeting to turn around and drive 3.5 hours back is a very long day. And so, I think we're going to make better use of people's time. I had because of our instructors were moving from site to site, I had a great line item for mileage. We were able to take what we saved in mileage and invest it in equipment.
Wow. So what has have there been any surprises when your range of oversight moved from Maine to national? Like how has can you give us some insights on, like, from a national perspective of digital equity and digital inclusion?
So Maine is no different than any other state, right? Every state has broadband challenges. Every state has to address digital equity and digital inclusion. There's in the infrastructure bill, which has not passed yet, there is a bill embedded in it called the Digital Equity Act. Our Senator King, who used to be our governor here in Maine, was one of the authors of that bill and worked with many of us in the digital inclusion and digital equity space to be sure that they had everything in that bill that we needed. That means that there's going to be money going to every state for digital equity and digital inclusion. My own personal feeling is that I don't believe that any infrastructure project should happen without that digital equity and digital inclusion plan. So digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, access to services. We achieve digital equity by promoting digital inclusion, which includes affordable broadband, affordable equipment, digital literacy training, and public computer access. So we had a small little town on the coast here that did a community broadband plan. So they had a consultant that helped them figure out what they had for broadband, what the town wanted for broadband, what the gap was, what was going to be the budget to build it. And this community broadband plan included a digital equity and digital inclusion plan, which is something that the National Digital Equity Center writes. And when we do that, we do a deep dive into the demographics of that community. Great. And what we found, there's the broadband committee made up of some town officials, health officials, school, businesses. It's a nice cross-representation of the community. What we found when we did that deep dive in the demographics was that 25% of their homes had a family median income of $10,000 or less. The committee was really surprised about that number because their mission is to get better broadband, right? And so they've been focusing on that. But that community, if it's going to build a fiber to the home, which is what their goal is, they have to address the affordability issue, because a fiber connection could be anywhere from $60, $70, $80 a month. and you have 25% of your families with a family median income of $10,000 or less, are you going to make the digital divide even deeper and leave that group behind? And so it was an eye-opening moment for that broadband committee. So they'll figure it out. They'll make sure that there's a plan in place. If they if they build it and they have some fun, they may include some funding for those digital equity and digital inclusion components. So that's not anything that you can take that model or that situation and move it right to any region across the country, and it's the same thing. You can build these networks, but if you're not addressing the digital inclusion components, then you need to make sure to support the network. Having the number of people subscribe to that broadband is going to help that broadband company or that community meet their return on investment. And so making sure that everyone has access to that network that they're building is extremely important.
Wow, you explained that so well. And I'm just so grateful for the deep dive you do in the demographics, for pointing out the extreme levels of poverty that we have all over the country.
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
And rural is rural is rural. And of course, there is urban poverty as well.
Absolutely. We see it in the urban centers. You might have companies that build around those lower income neighborhoods. And so that's an issue that is also being looked at and addressed.
That's great. I see there was a question. Do you see that? Do you feel like the workforce and HR is included in the digital inclusion?
So we've had, in the last few months, we have had over 500 students referred to us from Maine Department of Labor career centers. These are displaced workers, unemployed. And it became very apparent that many of the people who are displaced might not have been in jobs that needed technical skills, and now to get back into the workforce and perhaps change careers or get into an industry that is a little bit more advanced than what they've come from in the digital world. They needed to learn those skills. So we've been doing a lot of training, workforce development training. We have an entire curricula on work and business. It includes all the Microsoft classes, Microsoft Office, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, QuickBooks, which is a popular accounting program for small businesses. We have classes that help small businesses develop websites, because some don't. They're using something like Facebook or any of the other social media platforms. We've known that workforce development skills have to include digital skills. And so we're working with a lot of adult education programs across the state. We provide the classes and the instructors for them. They can bring their own students in. We're doing some more work with Department of Labor. We would like to be able to do one of the things we can do is a digital skills assessment, figure out where somebody is in their digital knowledge, and then come up with an individual learning plan to help them on that career pathway.
That's amazing how much the instruction can be individualized.
Yeah. Well, we're all at different levels, right? I mean, I like to use this example. I'm a power user with Excel. I use Excel all the time. I have never done a graph in Excel. And the reason I haven't done a graph is because nobody's asked me to do a graph, right? And so if you ask me to do a graph, I'm going to have to, very quickly figure out how am I going to do that. Now I've got a whole team of great instructors who will guide me through it. But when you think of the programs that you use every day, you're only using a small amount of what actually is in that program. And so, and for many of us that are over 40, we've learned because we've said, hey, Bahia, how did you do that? because it wasn't part of our formal education. And so I think that we've done a great job in getting where we are, and we've done it just on sheer grit and willpower, right? And sometimes, really out of necessity. You have a job, they bring in computers, they bring in programs, and you have to learn them. So I started with using computers in the 80s, which means that I'm now into my 40th year of using computers. And so, and then when I think about some of our students who are using this for the first time, what it tells me is that digital literacy training isn't going away, right? Because and then on top of that, we have all these programs and technology that's being developed every minute, and we're scrambling to learn it. We tend to see new users of technology. There's a carrot that's being dangled in front of them. I've heard it many times. I've been doing just fine with that paper and pencil. I don't need one of those newfangled computers. Until they find out that they can watch free movies on their television, or one of their kids have given them a Kindle or an iPad, and they're curious. They want to connect to they want to do FaceTime or a Zoom with their family. We do a class on digital library services, because you can download all these free books. So eventually, somebody, it's that carrot that gets dangled, and that's what brings them to one of our classes. What I will say is that almost all of our students, once they take that first class, will take multiple classes with us. And some of that is due to the instructors, who are very caring, very patient. After the classes, on the online classes, which is what we've been doing since the pandemic, the students can stay in touch with the instructors long after that class is over, if they need some more help, or they forgot something. And so we want to make sure that the student is supported in the best way possible, and is comfortable in learning that technology and reaching out to any one of us.
That is so meaningful, that to actually have a rapport, which sounds like it becomes a relationship with someone, so you're not afraid to ask more questions or sign up for it, and knowing like, oh, it's such a relief to know, okay, I didn't quite get that, but I know I can. If I don't catch up by myself, I know I'll be able to catch up because they're staying connected to me.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite stories, at the beginning of the pandemic, a friend of mine who's 80 years old, and he was career Navy. He's social, right? He was out bebopping all over the county, and now he had to stay home, and he was not happy. And so we got a tablet. I said, try this. And he sort of, he'd never used technology. His wife did, but he never did. And so we got him a tablet and assigned him a tutor, and he built the relationship with the tutor. And he needed to learn how to use technology, because he was on the board at the health center that you and I had been at. And they were going to have meetings in Zoom, and they were going to send PDFs, and he had no idea what a PDF was. And so the tutor worked with him for quite a while, and then got him online and joining any of the classes. And this student took every single class that instructor taught. He just was having a ball, and he was meeting all of these people online. And so he figured out a way to survive the pandemic and sheltering in place. But his favorite thing that he learned was Google Earth. So he traveled the world in the Navy, and then when he retired, he and his wife traveled all over, and that was what was bothering him most about the pandemic. He couldn't go anywhere, and so he learned how to do Google Earth, and he said in his great Down East accent, "I can go anywhere now, right from my recliner."
It is fascinating. And I love the point you made about like every minute there's new software development happening. There are new things being designed right now that I kind of can't wait to learn later, but I'm definitely signing up for some of your classes.
Great.
I'll definitely be registering soon. I wanted to ask you, so what are some of the things that you envision or want? Like, because I just feel like you see things like in my experience with you, you see things like a couple of decades before some of us or a lot of us. Are you what do you feel or see or is next?
Um, I think that I think that digital equity and digital inclusion needs to be embedded in all state government, right? So it's a line item in their budget, in Department of Labor, in Department of Education, in Department of Health and Human Services, even in places into agencies like Department of Transportation. You wouldn't think it, but you had a lot of remote workers during the pandemic who needed broadband, who needed equipment, who needed some skills to participate as a remote worker. So I would like to see um, uh, digital equity, digital inclusion embedded in every state government. Um, for the National Digital Equity Center, so we founded it in 2018. We used Maine as the model of how could we do could it be what we're doing be replicated in other states? And the answer to that is yes. We've raised over $4 million. It's a combination of federal, state, and private philanthropy. So we'd love to be able to help other states and other regions. We have a program in place. So the money that we've raised for the free digital literacy classes is for Maine residents. Anyone from outside of the state can take classes. It's a $50 a year tuition fee, and they can take as many classes as they wish. So for a program that's about to that might need to have us help them do a train the trainer program and sort of stand up a program, what we can do is we can offer those classes as a gap measure so that they're not losing traction and they can get their residents involved with digital literacy training. We think that all of the infrastructure projects need digital equity and digital inclusion plans. So we see ourselves in that role and not, in being part of a team in all these different regions, because it's going to take people on the local level to get these programs stood up. And then to be ready for some of the federal money that's coming in that will help states have good digital equity and digital inclusion services for all of their residents. So, we see ourselves in those roles. I feel like some days I'm a historian, and I've only been doing this since 2015. That's not really that long ago, but so much has changed over the years, and technology is ever evolving. And and that said, we also have to be safe, and we have to be careful, and we have to make sure that people are not just, I hear it, I saw it on the internet, it must be true. That's not necessarily true. And we've seen that over and over again. So giving people the skills so that they can identify what's good, what's not good, protecting their online presence so that they're not victims of fraud and abuse are all very important on an ongoing basis.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I wish I could think of something you haven't thought of yet, but I just love your experience.
I'm sure I haven't, but yeah.
You will by tomorrow. Before we answer, I saw there was another question from Rachel, which I actually remember, but I wanted to first say what's coming to my mind is a lot of concern I heard from truck drivers and other people who were concerned about, wait a minute, what happens to us or other people in more physical labor jobs if those are taken by automated self-driving trucks or automated machines in other industries. And just hearing about, digital literacy and digital inclusion and expanding and growing and knowing there's a mind like yours and all the teams you're helping build. And I know you don't take credit for, but so many people partnering and thinking, it just gives me a lot of faith and hope for people to be able to who are concerned, who have those concerns, like, wait a minute, don't tell me I'm going to have to do something technical. Like, there's so much, we can overcome so much of our fear and hesitancy and worry if we know, like, hey, there's a National Digital Equity Center. And boy, $50 a year. Did I hear that right?
That's it.
That's incredible.
We see that sometimes an organization will provide tuition for their members. So we see that too. So sometimes an organization will step up and say, okay, I'm a senior center and I want to enroll 20 of our members for your courses. So we can do that as well.
That's great. People can ask if they have an organization, they can say, hey, can you cover this for me?
And I think to your question about, what becomes obsolete? Well, I think that historically we can look back and the things that we did 20, 30, 40 years ago, the things I did as a kid, I'm not doing them anymore. And so we evolve. And we learn new things. I mean, lifelong learning, it happens. We do it all the time. You think of your old black and white TVs with the rabbit ears, and then we went to color television, and we're excited on Sunday night when Walt Disney's Peacock showed up on the screen in color for the first time. Now we have smart TVs, and we've learned how to do it, right? And some of us still might be kicking and screaming about it, but in the end, we come around. And then there's opportunity. So the truck driver is a good example. We have a lot of truck drivers that are using technology in the truck, right? And GPS systems. I forgot. I mean, I have a map. I've got a map in my car. I don't know the last time I opened it because I just plug it into the GPS and say, "Take me here," and I become very dependent on a GPS to get me all over the creation. So I think that we it's how we roll as human beings. We learn things. We replace things. We look for the next widget that's out there, and some of us are early adopters and want to do it right away, and there are those late adopters who are going to be a little bit further behind, but we're going to help them the best way we can.
Yes. Wow, that's very encouraging. And I can't believe we only have 1 minute left. I really want to I'd love to hear your favorite thing that's arisen, but would you please say your website and your email address now, and then maybe once again as soon as I finish my wrap up?
Sure. We have lots of information on our website. It's www.digitalequitycenter.org. I've put up my personal email addresses. Feel free to reach out. It's Susan@digitalequitycenter.org. I may not be able to answer you, but I have a whole team that is right there with me, helping us every step of the way. And your question was
favorite thing.
Favorite thing. That's hard, right? So I get excited. I love new projects. I love to what's the next thing we're going to do. But I think that my favorite thing since the pandemic is the joy that we have brought to so many older residents. That has, I just can't say enough about that. I think you talk about a feel-good moment. This has been a feel-good almost 2 years in the work that we've done with our older residents across the state.
Wow. Gosh. And thank you so much. And I wanted to thank Roxy, our sound engineer, and Dean, our producer. And again, to you, Susan, thank you so much for everything you're doing, including this hour of your time. And thank you to all the listeners. And please be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern at W4CY Radio or Talk 4 TV to watch us on video. Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Inarticulate